We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you to our faculty panel for coming. So this topic of academic integrity is one that has been kind of cropping up a lot in a lot of different ways across campus. And so as there have been a lot of sessions recently on the use of AI and other tools for academic integrity issues, what I wanted to do with this session is frame it a little bit differently and look for the solutions and kind of put solutions to a lot of academic integrity potential issues in kind of one place, and see how those across campus are addressing them in varying fields and in varying modalities of teaching. So I'd like to start by introducing our panel here. My name is Cindy Tran. I'm out of Department of Chemistry. I teach primarily upper level chemistry and forensic science courses, and a lot of lab courses in that. So that's kind of the perspective I'll bring.
I'm Benjamin Freed from Department of Languages and Cultural Studies, Anthropology and Sociology. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about this particular issue with Anthropology 201, Intro to Biological Anthropology.
Jeff Reed, in Child and Family Studies. I teach two fairly large online classes, mostly intro and face-to-face classes.
And I'm at Winslow. I'm in psychology, and I teach sort of psychology and upper level classes and online as well. So, and I'm an ungrader, which means that I'm a weirdo. Go ahead.
I'm slightly less weird, but not much. I'm a kind of a hybrid. I'm Chris Daniel. I'm a faculty professional development manager, I guess, for EKU Online. Also teach graduate level courses in the instructional design and learning technology program. So I work with faculty and have for a long time, and I hear all the things good and bad about this technology and others.
My name is Cindy Judd. I work primarily in the library, and I also teach an adolescent literature course, which is for seniors who are going to be future middle school teachers. And I have in the past also taught GSD.
All right, so we'll just kind of start with our first question. Change it on my computer, but not the screen. And to kind of frame the conversation, we'll start with just what are some of the barriers that the students in your course or program face that kind of make these dishonest practices that we'll talk about in a few minutes really appealing. Because I think to understand how to deter students from academically dishonest practices or encourage honest ones, we have to kind of know why they're leaning that way in the first place. And I know every group of students is a little different in their motivations. So I just want to hear from anyone that wants to share from the panel what your thoughts are on why students are leaning this way.
Well, a couple of things I wrote down. One of the things that I know students have expressed to me, even my own kids who are at various stages in their college careers, is if a course only has either 2 or 3 assignments, there's only just a very few things that are graded. Everything depends on that. No matter that they show up every day, participate, do homework, none of those things really matter. The only thing that matters is like this big paper or this test. I think there's a lot of pressure for them to perform, and that's the only thing that really quote unquote matters to them, is that thing or those 2 things that are graded. And another thing I thought about too was, I think this is not just true for freshmen, but I think for freshmen, there is still a little bit of this high school mentality that because everything is about your GPA and getting that grade. And so I think there's that carryover. And again, I think this carries through college. It's not just for freshmen, but I think that they're feeling a lot of pressure to get the grade, whether that's because their financial aid depends on it, or just that feeling of that's really what school is all about, getting the grade, as opposed to the learning that's going to lead to and transfer into, your future career, whatever.
To some extent, I also feel as though a lot of our students are coming in with practices that they've learned through online education. how to take an online quiz or exam. And in many cases, Google searching and course heroing and things like that are certainly issues that are out there for sure. Don't know how to break it of the habit, but these are habits that they have gained, and can readily see those in courses for sure.
I think for me, as I think about it kind of broadly, something that's been helpful, I don't know if anybody's familiar with the fraud diamond as a framework for viewing students engaging in these kinds of behaviors with, you know, the extent of the motivation that they have, their ability to rationalize it, their capability of utilizing these kinds of things, and then their motivation for doing it. I think as I try to think of strategies to mitigate these issues, I try to think of it within that framework. One thing that specifically students have said to me is that if the exams are online, that increases their, you know, ability and even motivation and ability to rationalize cheating or using Chegg or whatever it may be. And then also if they know that the questions are from like a textbook that you haven't put any work in, then that they in my conversations, it seems they rationalize it that way. Well, you know, they didn't put the work in, so I'm not going to, that kind of.
Man, turning it around on us.
Yeah.
Wow. I would also say that something that's different with this generation, it seems like from my ancient generation, is that so many students now have other obligations outside of school that take up so much of their time, whether it's jobs, family, whatever it is, plus all the ones that I had, you know, like a social life. And so they're just more constrained in time. And, you know, this is, I think they see this as a way to, you know, either save time for other things that they want to do, or they don't have as much time left to do these things. And so they need to figure out a way to be, I think in their mind, it might be more efficient. And then given the things you just said too, it's like, well, you know, I don't have as much time. And so these rationalizations I can come up with and the facilities that I can use, I think it makes it much more appealing. I guess I would also say that, and actually this goes back to what you were saying about them kind of turning around on us, that I think that they oftentimes don't understand the value in the things that we were asking them to do. And the transparency in teaching and learning is really important. We can say to them, this is why I'm asking you to do this. There's a benefit to it that's clear, that I can explain to you that if you do it from some other method, Chegg or whatever it is, you're taking a shortcut on this activity, but it's going to shortcut you right around the benefit. And so I try to put a lot of time into trying to explain to them what the benefits are of these things. And I think that makes a big difference.
I was just going to say, the research line on the fraud triangle to me is pretty clear and explains a whole lot. It's the best sort of concept that I've found that kind of explains it. In graduate courses, I think part of that is motivation or rationale as being one, you know, leg on that triangle. But I feel like it's time pressure, especially in online. We have an 8-week term. How are you gonna, if you have 3 kids, or if you have like an ailing parent, or you know, you've got something, anything above and beyond kind of what a standard non-traditional student has, and then to do 1, let alone 2 courses within 8 weeks, I just think it's very difficult. And that time pressure, like I feel that, I hear that more often than anything else. I don't get the attitude or these rationalizations that may be associated with undergraduates. Like everybody does this. Information online is completely open. So if I can go search it up, I can just put it in the test. Like, I don't get as much of that. I have 3 kids. I have a sick dog. I've got all these problems, and there are 24 hours in the day. And so, you know, I don't know how to solve for that, but you know, that's what I hear. And I think that's probably the most salient issue that I hear.
Shirley online said that she agrees, and that was a good point, Chris. 2 8-week simultaneous courses are challenging.
And yet it's a product that we know these prospective students want. So, you know, we're in a conundrum. Like, of course, I'm currently teaching. I would love to offer the 16 weeks just because, you know, we need to decompress some of those hours. You know, you need more time to absorb, you need more time just to develop, but yet there we are. If we said this is a 16-week course, now I feel strongly about half the people would register for it.
So plus so many of our in-person students are taking online classes, so they're 3 in person and 2 on, you know, 1 online and then 1 on, so they're doing, you know, that compression as well as.
Yeah.
And they may not be used to 8-week intensity.
Question for the panel. Does somebody mind walking through clarifying the broad diamond and broad triangle? I've heard that reference and just want to make sure I understand the baseline model here.
Sure. I think it's correct me if I'm wrong, it's ability, that may be the difference between the diamond and the triangle.
Yeah.
But ability, motivation, rationalization.
And where opportunity presents itself. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I'll send you an article on it.
All right, so thank you all for kind of doing barriers to success. Most of the ones that I see for my own students have already been echoed here, so I won't rehash too many of those. But thinking about the barriers, and we've touched on some of them already, but kind of very succinctly, like what are some of the things that you see students doing that for your course have been termed academic dishonesty, or something that would flag for you as something you don't want them to do. So one thing, I'll start with this one. We have students work in pairs a lot in the lab, and so they're gathering data together, but I make it very clear I want you to write your own lab report to think about the data on your own. And I see a lot of times students are working together because they have the same data and they worked in the lab together, and so they write a kind of fairly communal version of a lab report, but it's unclear who was actually writing the lab report. And that's one that flags for me a lot, is that line between encouraging working together, which is a skill we want them to develop, but also being able to identify what their own understanding is. And so that's one of the areas that that my classes struggle with in the upper level sciences, particularly.
I would say in education, at least in the major assignments that I give in my class, they're looking up part of the assignment that they have to do for each of the books they read is to look up statistics. And I tell them flat out, like, this is not, as the librarian in me cringes a little bit, but for this particular part of the assignment that they have to do for every book that they read, I don't mind that they're copying and pasting as long as they are giving credit to the source, because I want them to see they're looking up statistics on some of the issues that are covered, and it's all about critical literacy. And so I'm not super bad on that, except I don't know that when they're copying and pasting a huge chunk of information, that they're even reading what they're putting in there, you know. So maybe I've set myself up for that, but it's in the context of a bigger assignment. But sometimes they just don't cite where they got it from at all. And so, you know, I've already made that not a big deal, and I'm not looking for direct quotes. And, you know, I've already sort of erased the pressure for that, but still, I don't think they're looking at it super carefully. And I will say, from the library perspective, one of the things we see all the time is students come in, they've already written their papers, and now they need some sources. That is super common. The students will tell us, I've already written the paper, I just need to get my sources. And, you know, of course, we want to help them find sources, but we also try to give the caveat that, well, the point of the source is to give you some foundation and also some basis for what you write to begin with. But yeah, so those are two common things that we see.
Shirley online says, not citing diagrams copied from an article, lack of in-text citations using CI strategies, SEE-I. Under elaborate, I would expect a citation in the application of content. Often students just put in a reference list with limited in-text citation.
This hasn't been mentioned yet, but for my large online classes, 200 plus students, there's quizzes and exams that are on there, and whether I write them or not, they get access to them, and so trying to mitigate that is one of the things I have to deal with for sure.
I usually like to get 3 to 5 sentence long responses to different topics and so forth. But I usually preface the question with using your own words, comma, and then proceed. And usually early in the semester, I'll do that. And invariably, I will get, this is directly from this source, and I can identify it clearly. But it does open up a frank discussion. And one time I did it last semester, and the information that was being used was actually from my doctoral dissertation advisor. And when I laid the guilt trip on basically saying, you did that to my advisor? I eulogized him, And so I didn't get any further bouts of that last semester, but I just shouldn't have to get to that point. But I think the use of that term, and then immediately after the first assignment where I see something like that, leading into a frank discussion, actually it tends to personalize it a little bit more so that they understand it's like, getting back to the earlier point about innovation from the professor's side. Yeah, it's innovative. Yeah, probably don't want to go that route again, do you?
Well, I would say that I've gone through the entire process of academic integrity violations and the investigation, and I've been all the way through that process a couple times, and it's not pleasant, but I don't have any cheating anymore in my classes because I'm on an ungrader. Students cheat because they want a grade, right? They cheat because they're interested in that score, and they don't understand the benefit of doing the assignment, and they don't care about it, or they don't have time. But they still need to have that score because that score is really important because it's going to affect their grade. So as an ungrader, I don't have points or scores or grades, and so there's not that pressure on my students to do those things that would cause me to initiate that process. It's one of the greatest things about ungrading for me is that I just don't, not only is it great because I don't have to worry about my students cheating, but I also love it because it doesn't put my students into that bind where they're thinking, well, should I cheat or not? I feel like in some ways what we do, or what I used to do, is sort of entrapment. But I set up these situations where cheating is attractive, it's tempting, and maybe even in their minds they can rationalize it, and it's an effective thing, a smart thing to do, even though they know it's an ethical violation. And so ungrading just removes that pressure, that incentive to cheat, and removes them from that ethical dilemma. And I just think it's so nice not to have to worry about it. So again, I know I'm a weirdo because I don't grade people. I give feedback. I don't want to do a lecture about ungrading, but I give lots of feedback, but I just don't put points and scores, and my students don't worry about that. So I haven't seen any instances of cheating since I started ungrading because there's just no point in doing it. There's no reason to cheat anymore.
So I think that's a good segue then into what are the ways in which we're encouraging engaged work, that isn't motivating this this ethical dilemma, as you put it, Matt, of whether to cheat or not to cheat. And so Ben and Matt have already graciously started our slide points for this. And I welcome anyone else that wants to kind of jump in with what are you doing to encourage your students in their own work. And we've got lots of time for this section. So feel free to elaborate on more than one technique if you have them.
I'd like to just echo a little bit of what Matt was saying, because although I don't go full tilt ungrading, I definitely ungrade. I provide a lot of feedback and rough assessments, that sort of thing. And I do think that what Matt is saying is absolutely spot on in that it does eliminate a lot of those sorts of issues. I would safely say that at least in my course, where there is at least one assessment that I have to make with this gen ed course is, can the student take novel information and draw valid scientific conclusions? That one I really have to school them with, okay? But that's the one where I do see people trying to look things up constantly. And, you know, I've now sort of framed it also in the way of, if you were being employed by somebody and there's this novel situation that happened at work and your supervisor has asked for your considered opinion about what you just saw, how would you respond? And so I've also tried to incorporate a little bit more of essential employability skills into it, as you know, to get to the motivation a little bit more. But that's just a little, you know, what I could do. But I just wanted to echo a little bit of what Matt was saying about the ungrading.
To piggyback off sort of your work career or what's next preparedness, most of the courses in our instructional design and learning technology program are geared around terminal performances that are portfolio ready, portfolio focused. And so it really helps that, you know, if you want this to be good for an employer, it probably ought to be your own work, or at the very least, it ought to be something that you're so intimately familiar with, you can tell them the rationale, the problem that you solved, the results, and that sort of thing. So we find that it's sort of a more project-based learning approach. And so I think that that encourages more engagement.
Yeah, I want to build on that too. You know, by the time the students come in, you know, again, the two classes that I've taught are literally first semester freshmen versus 1 semester away from graduating, right? So I've seen a lot of different things. It's with the seniors in the adolescent lit class, you know, the benefit of that is they are student teaching. So even though they're not doing the same level that they will be when they're in their final semester, they are doing student teaching. So connecting what we're doing to something they're doing in their student teaching and that they can apply to their future classroom is really important. And so talking a lot about and giving them activities related to what we're reading, that, hey, here's, and I try to bring in little tech tools and I use those things, ask them to do those activities because they are activities they can then transfer into their own practice. And so I try to do a lot of things that are tied to, hey, do this, produce this thing, because this is something you can use later, so that they feel like this, it's meaningful, it's relevant. And I think it's also really important that students feel success, that they somewhere along the way feel like something they've done in the class has communicated to them, I can do this. Because I feel like if they taste a little bit of success and feel like I can do this, yes, every now and then they'll bomb a test or they won't get the grade they want on some other kind of assignment. But I feel like it's important to help students feel like I can do this. And there are many ways we can communicate that. Sometimes that's through a number or a letter on a paper that they've done or an assignment or whatever. But I feel like giving them opportunities to feel like, okay, I'm getting this, or I haven't gotten it yet, but I'm getting there. You know, I feel like building those things into your course is really important, because if students feel like from the beginning, this is too hard, I'm not going to be able to do this, to me, that's a huge motivation to cheat. I've got to take this class. I need this class to graduate, whatever it is. And so I have to do whatever it takes. Clearly, this thing I've done or this thing I've done has not worked. I can't do this, but I still have to take it. So what am I going to do to get out of this kind of thing? So I feel like, again, connecting it to their future careers, giving them tastes and samples of success are good ways to help them feel like I don't have to seek outside help to complete these assignments and to do this work.
I think the literature has been helpful for me in this regard on academic integrity, and just creating two kind of buckets that I have in my mind that I can pull from with compliance-based and values-based approaches, where y'all mentioned both of them, I think, where values-based are the relationship-rich kind of practices, the transparent practices that help connect these assignments and the things we're doing to real world skills or things you'll do, in your career. And this is how it would look in your career, and connecting it that way, and then building trust and connection with the students and helping them understand why you're doing this. I think that all helps. And then the compliance base are the kind of tricks that we kind of talk about, I think, sometimes to help encourage them, like reduce the opportunity, reduce motivation some. And so I've again, going back to my online classes where it's large, they're gen ed, they're online, and so I use even if I write my own questions, they'll show up on check or whatever. So I've rewriting them every semester, or trying to do some of that is one way. Use some GAs to do that as well. But recently I've thought of using ChatGPT to reword them for me. So that's kind of turning it back around on me.
Yes.
And just to give you a kind of a rewording of the same question, that kind of thing, for on the compliance-based side. And then again, I'll stick with online, although I have other classes, but discussion board kinds of assignments, requiring integration of the course content and clear references, I think at least ensures that there's a baseline level of interacting with the content that can't be so easily, replicated from ChatGPT or those kinds of things. That's been another helpful approach. And
I would say too, building on that, I use Jamboard pretty much every class that we meet. And I think the more that you can sort of, I don't know if this is the right phrase, but hold them accountable, hey, so we're going to tie something you're reading into, so they have to apply something they have read to a question or a prompt. And it's not anything like intensive. It should be something interesting or creative or fun or whatever, but having them post something, it's visible. Depending on the size of the class, I usually will have them put their name on it. Not always, but sometimes I'll have them put their name on it so I can say, okay, so Matt, I see that you said blah, blah, blah. So, then I can build on that. And I tell them, it's not a trick. It's not like, oh, I'm going to eeny, meeny, miny, mo, today it's Matt. I'm going to pick on Matt. I build that discussion, that conversation based on what they posted into the class. And so I think the more things that you can do in class, those are beneficial. Ways that you can tie the content and you're asking them to comment or reference the content is also a great strategy. And really, I think the more the more interesting or fun, or again, those things where they want to participate, in part because this is kind of interesting and cool, but also because, hey, I can do this. I know the answer to that, or I know what I'm going to say is going to contribute. So I feel like, again, it goes back to motivation and really opportunities to do things in class where they know they're going to be held accountable, but not because they're afraid, oh my gosh, I better read, because they're not reading a chapter a night or anything. For me, they're reading a book every 2 weeks. And so, but in between, they're also doing activities. So I think that, again, it goes back to helping them understand they're going to be accountable, helping them and providing interesting and creative activities to share their knowledge is also helpful.
Yeah, I think those low stakes kind of assignment, you give a big high stakes assignment, a low stakes assignment beforehand, like you were saying, helping them build, some degree of success and connected with that high stake assignment.
Yeah.
Really, really helpful.
I liked what Kimberly said about making them feel successful. Like students need that entry feeling of success. And I think when I think of how I've like scaffolded some of my bigger assignments like papers or even we do these big like case file lab reports, but the first one is like an intentionally easy type of evidence where it's all just visual comparison. Did the tire prints look the same or not? And so it's a good way for them to kind of build some confidence in saying, okay, I had to write this big lab report that included my data and my analysis and my notebook notes and all this stuff. But it's in a way that kind of says, yeah, okay, I've put one of these together and I know what goes into it now. And I have this feeling of success. So now when I go to one that requires a little more data analysis, I'm not worried about all the other pieces. I can focus in on the data, which is kind of the new thing. So I think that like scaffolding aspect helps. It also helps with checking references because then they have to get their references as they go. You're turning in your introduction. Well, you have to give me some references that you might use, whether you use them or not, but tell me about what's in those references that might be helpful. And so as they're scaffolding, you can kind of see, okay, they're building the references and you don't get the paper at the end that they've written and then found the references for. So at least those kind of scaffolding pieces help build that success piece up. And also that kind of open-endedness of the question, right? So when we're dealing with scientific data, there's room for some interpretation, right? I know what I gave them to analyze, but they have to rationalize their answer based on their actual data. And sometimes the instrument's not working right. They get the wrong thing. They ran the wrong thing. They've got the wrong result. But as long as they're kind of rationalization is there, which is going to be unique for every person because the exact data they have is different, or how they're approaching it is different. I think those kind of open-ended things, now they're harder to grade. Your rubric needs to be a little more loose, but in terms of the motivation and the learning to say, yes, these are the kinds of reports I'm going to have to write in the future, and this is why I'm doing it, and kind of easing up the success pieces, I think is important.
Well, I think at some point we need to talk about how the world is changing. We were talking about ChatGPT. And I don't know what's going to happen, but I think we're going to have to change what we think of as cheating, because these resources are going to become better and better, and they're going to become more and more integrated into their workflow. Right, we were just talking before the panel started about Microsoft's going to integrate AI into Word and all of their products. So it's going to be right there. And if we are in the position of saying, don't ever use that, it's going to be almost impossible for us to enforce that. And more importantly, I would say, when they get out into the world, they're going to be using those things. And so if we somehow manage to enforce that they should never use AI, we're not really preparing them for the world they're going to get into after they graduate, because AI is going to be there. And so I just think that we need to be thoughtful about the things that I used to think of as cheating are going to be not only not cheating in the future, they're going to be smart and efficient and effective uses of resources. And we just are not going to be able. I don't want to keep my head in the sand about, you just can't do these things because that's the way it's always been, because that is not the world that they live in. Our students who are 20 years old, by the time they're 30 years old, God knows what it's going to be like. It's going to be totally different. And, I don't know, is it really cheating to use ChatGPT to answer stuff? Because, it's going to be part of their workflow if they have jobs, because we might not have jobs. Sorry, we'll go ahead.
This is like, it's like Clippy, except that Clippy's not gonna die, it's gonna be.
Yes, and Clippy's gonna be the smartest person you know.
Right, yeah.
And I think that leads us into kind of our last segment of like, what are we doing around the topic of academic integrity? How are we framing that? And sometimes it comes from a shift of what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable. I mean, it's similar to, you know, everyone saying, don't touch Wikipedia, you know, when I was in undergrad, and it's like, well, but now I'm like, oh, where do I start? Well, let's start at Wikipedia. So let's teach them how to use this as a starting point, or even saying, okay, you found this thing on Chegg. Great, you found the answers to your homework and you can get the points. But again, what is the motivation if all you're doing is points driven? But can you work the problem when I need you to work the problem? You know, so finding ways to bridge that gap of the tools are out there. And I think if we just ignore that the tools are there, say those are off limits, then it loses a conversation. And so one of the ways that I've bridged the gap of that conversation especially in my lab setting, where you get rushed, you forget to take data, so then you're like tempted to make up the data or copy someone else's data, or you're working together. And we talk through kind of, we spend a lot of time on our first week in lab, not doing anything lab related, but talking through these kind of dilemmas of saying, well, here's a scenario. What are you going to do in that scenario? And how am I there to help you? You know, if you forgot to take a piece of data or copy it off the computer, come talk to me and let's work that out. You know, how am I here to support your learning also, instead of just being like, well, you didn't take it, you know. You're going to have to come up with your own solution. Like, come talk to me about these issues that you're having.
But you're creating, by doing that at the very beginning, you're creating the environment that and not that they won't cheat or try anyway, but you're creating an environment that says, look, you know, I'm here about your learning. And so I know there's, not that you say this, but there will be temptations to cheat, copy off of your lab partner, whatever.
Oh, I say it.
Yeah. So, you know, you say those things and then you say, but listen, you know, the important thing here is I want you to learn. You need to learn these to go on to do X, Y, Z if they're going to be, you know, especially the more advanced classes. So you saying that to me sends the message to the student. As a student, I'm hearing you say, okay, so if I'm tempted to copy, or if I did this thing over here, or, oh my gosh, I just flat out don't get it. I really want to copy, but I shouldn't. I can come to you. You're setting up an environment where I might actually come to you as opposed to being afraid of you and seeing you as the penalizer, as opposed to someone that, you know, may or may not give me what I want, but at least I can approach you. I think that's a huge part of breaking down a barrier to cheating, is creating an environment where, not that you're just going to always say, oh, don't worry about it, just don't turn that in. Y'all just, you know, not that, but listen, I want to work with you because the important thing for me is that you're learning. So.
I've got a question for the group. How do we are the rules different at lower levels of discourse, or these before the students have sort of bridged these intellectual and skills gaps? So, for example, with GPT, do we feel different about it for a 100 level course than we do a graduate, you know, student perhaps contemplating toying with GPT-3 to do something? I'm not sure how I feel about that yet. Like, I almost feel like the rules should be the same, but when I talk with colleagues, when I talk with coworkers, well, we dabble in it and we see what it gives us back, and maybe it's garbage, but maybe it spawns another idea. So it gets into kind of Matt's question, like, we're going to be using this in our vocations. I really don't care if you're making knowledge or you're assisting with the transformation or the transference of knowledge, you're probably going to use it in some way. How do we feel about that at lower levels versus higher levels?
I'd like to add to that question if I could, because I did have something about online classes versus in person. So there's an expectation in online classes that you do have more access to your notes and your resources than in-person classes. So you have that expectation already. So this is one more resource that people are, you know, they're motivated to use, especially in that setting when there is an expectation that they're allowed to use their resources. So how do we differentiate between an online or hybrid or in-person class when we're talking about this, along with upper level versus lower?
Well, one thing that I run into, because I do teach online, web blended, and face-to-face. And one of the things that I've noticed with the frequent use of either GPT or Google searching and things like that is while they may use it, they're not that good at it, especially when you have a time limit. I can think of a quiz where there were 2 questions that person was probably searching on an image, and it took 6 minutes on one and 5 minutes on the other. That left 12 minutes for 20 other questions. So there's some skills that need to be developed in terms of using those resources anyway. In addition, I think from a previous conversation, my assumption here with ChatGPT is that, at least for right now, costs a little bit. And so there's also that issue too. Some people have the advantages.
Yeah.
So I do see those sorts of issues going on. I think at the lower level classes that you're saying, like the 100, 200 sort of thing, I do see those as opportunities to get the conversation going, pretty much as Cindy was saying earlier. It's like, yeah, go ahead. Let's see how you work with this. And then here's why it's probably not a good idea. And here's how to improve it. But then not only mention it early on, it's the reinforcement of it every single time. And it's frustrating to do that every week, but it will encourage the learning and the development of the learning so they're not caught in the time crunch issues that we oftentimes see with people who don't necessarily have that skill of being able to search things. As a matter of standard course, when I use images on my exams, I make sure I flip it horizontally, I shrink it a little bit, and I shove a picture of Brad Pitt in there. Okay. And by doing that, it actually cuts down on the ability to have to go there, because I have to get back to that question. Can they draw valid scientific conclusions? And I tell them up front, this is what I'm going to do. You're going to be searching. What makes you think I haven't taken care of that already? And then I change all my questions every semester. I really do. I may change one word or whatever, but it's a significant word, right? So I think that there are those sorts of aspects in there early on. I think with the 100, 200 level courses, increasing the emphasis on the value associated with actual learning is the key thing. And it will work probably for a significant chunk of them, and it won't work for a significant chunk of them as well. And I've learned to, unfortunately, accept that that's what's the deal, especially when learning with different modalities.
I think getting at some of what everyone has spoken to, you have to kind of rethink your class. What are your objectives for these students? So, you know, even if it's an intro class, but things you're talking about are clearly connected to something that they will need in their career, or skill or knowledge that they'll need immediate access to, not something that they can just Google, like, you know, marriage and family therapy. You can't just sit there on your phone and Google, oh, what's a good theory or approach to this, right? You need access to it. So more directly connected this to an immediate skill in their career. I think the more you can talk about that and say, look, you can cheat, you can use whatever you want on this, but you're going to need this in your career at some point.
And I would say, you know, one of the things we see from the library side, because people are coming in here and we see lots of stuff. But one of the things we see and that students talk about is the same assignment semester after semester after semester. There's really no change. And students will come in and try to complete the assignment, and the tool they're trying to use, we don't even have access to that database anymore or whatever, or the way they're trying to answer the question that worked 5 years ago, but it doesn't work now because of some technology or some tool we have or don't have or subscribe to. And there are just so many challenges with assignments that don't change over time. And students know, if you have Dr. Daniels here, if you have Dr. Daniel for your class, oh yeah, he's the one that gives the blah, blah, blah assignment. that's the students talk about that. They know that. And so, but again, the frustration is some of them are actually trying to complete these assignments. They come to us to get help. And sometimes they come to us just because we're a friendly face, not because they're coming because I need an article to answer this assignment. And they'll say, can you just help me? Here's the assignment, and they'll show it to us. And, again, there's no transparency. They don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. They just know it says to go do X. And so this is also hard on online classes when, especially if it's an eCampus class that can't be changed in the middle of the semester and they've been given an assignment that hasn't been changed or updated to match what resources are available. So I think that adapting and changing and constantly rethinking the way we're assessing and the assignments we're giving is really important, because again, if we're going to help students want to do the work, I think part of that is them, number one, not seeing the same assignment that their friend did 5 years ago when they already graduated. But I think it's also what is being assigned and the expectations, if they have anything to do with resources, outside resources, especially things that they're going to get in the library. First of all, it's helpful for us to know, like if you have a good relationship with your liaison, to say, hey, here's some of the assignments coming down the pipeline, or here's something I want to try in the fall, the spring, whatever. We can help with making sure we have the support for that. But also just understanding what's being asked for, because when students come to us, we always say, bottom line, you need to talk to your instructor. I can try to interpret this. I can tell you what I think it means, but ultimately you need to talk to the instructor, because this is their class. But yeah, so just know that, we in the library are here to support that, but we hear a lot of the frustration. And I think at that point, that's when students also are tempted to just kind of throw in the towel and try to find the quote unquote easy way. And Dr. Freed, you mentioned, putting the Brad Pitt thing in the image, and you tell students that, there's a lot of students that think, and you were talking about the students finding the answers, the test bank online or whatever. Students know they are, they spend so much time trying to find some of those things out rather than doing some of the work. But if they think that you aren't savvy and they think that you don't get it and you're going to be able to sort of easily, let me tell you, you are fair game for them. And so they will really try to push and take advantage if they can. So I don't mean that to sound so negative, but they really do. And the fact is, there's a lot of people who kind of are like, oh, well, the test bank, I'm going to just use whatever the publisher gives me for test questions. And those are inevitably online and available. And if they aren't, somebody has put them, what's the thing? It just escaped. No, it's the, what? Quizlet. It's on Quizlet. P.S. If you don't know, it's already on Quizlet. So if it's in a test bank, or if you've given those questions before, somebody's putting it on Quizlet. So so I think it's really about just constantly being aware of our own assignments, things that we've assigned in the past, and making sure that we are not setting them up to fail by assigning things or giving work where they're not able to complete it, because that thing isn't at that URL anymore that you embedded in the course, or that resource you're asking them to get their answer from or base their assignment on. It doesn't even exist, or we don't have access to it.
And I would just add, it doesn't even need to be Chegg or Quizlet or anything. I had an upper level class last fall that you could tell there was a Google Doc or something out there that everyone had access to, that the first couple students would build, and then you would watch the students take fewer and fewer attempts at the, formative homework to get the results. And you could tell who was doing it. So it doesn't even have to be open to the public and searchable. The classes will build them themselves. So
collaborate.
Right. So I love this discussion that we're having, and I think we've gotten some really great points for the day, but in an effort to kind of keep on time, I think we only have 50 minutes for this one. So just to make sure that we get a couple minutes here at the end, if there are any lingering questions from the audience. Sarah?
I find it really interesting, especially the group piece. I know you've mentioned a little bit and the integrity, some of the what is cheating, and I'm disregarding the plain out plagiarism or copy. Beyond that, there is kind of like gray areas where is this okay, is this better or worse? And in groups, I have a self-reflection at the end, and sometimes the students like this person in my group was not on the academic, like students themselves have different levels of this academic integrity, right? And I've tried to handle this in different ways, like for example, remove the grading completely, just give participation points, but then those groups, even though I give them feedback, there is huge performance differences that I see, and for them not to have the information on the performance, right? Like not knowing you were terrible. I mean, not terrible, but some people are much worse than other people, and it may be helpful for them to have that performance feedback. But adding that performance feedback may include more of those integrity concerns, because some students may be lower and they may be more prone to do it. So my question is, all of these issues which at the individual level is like you and your students have conversation and discuss it. How do you manage when it's student to student? And for me, I only see these at the end of the course when they tell me, like, I have a free open anonymous, tell me everything that happened in your group type of question just to know what's going on. And all of these things come up there and I just don't know how to bring it back. And so how would you handle it in groups of the students themselves?
So one thing that I've done with group works, especially group projects, is we start the project with a group contract where I have the students actually walk through and build their own contract. And it starts with prompted questions of saying, give me your best group experience. What was the best thing that happened in a group project ever? And what made it a great group project? And then think about your like absolute worst and tell everyone your like worst group experience and what made it terrible. And then craft some policies, at least one off of each question, but usually students get 2 or 3 off of it that say, okay, this is what made it terrible. We will not, as a group, we have decided these are the things that are going to make a group terrible. We will not do these things. And then also, what are the consequences if someone in the group is doing these things? And so I have them put that on file with me, and I'm like, I will hold on to it. And when you as a group feel like someone is not living up to your contract, you ask me for an intervention, and I will be the mediator for this group with the contract you all decided upon and signed. So at that point, it lets the students be the ones, as the semester has gone, kind of policing, oh, this person, we said we would respond with our parts by this date, and they haven't. And now they call me and we sit down and we say, okay, well, what's going on? And is this something that we can work through? Or do I need to separate someone out of the group and let the group continue on and make modifications like that? So it really makes them be their own advocates for something that's not working, but it gives them an avenue to not just say, I'm unhappy, but we as a group are not functioning the way we as a group said we would.
I'll jump in with a quick thought outside of ChatGPT for groups is I like to assign group roles. So if there's 5 different things that have to be done in order to get the project done, and everybody's responsible for all those things, that nobody is responsible. So I like to assign specific responsibility to where they do their part, and either somebody else does their part, which is probably not going to happen, or they do their part in order to complete the assignment. Everybody has a different part to do.
I will add on that my group project in one of my classes is a presentation. And so I have them meet with me then like mid-semester to tell me who's in charge of which part of their presentations.
Right.
So I have that kind of record of who's doing what or who's planning to do what before the final version too. So it's that same idea of like splitting up the roles, but they've all had time to kind of figure out where they actually have an interest in this project. And then they pick their own roles and then tell me what those roles are.
I will just say, well, one of the lessons I learned the hard way, or after a long time, was I used to think that my class was the most important class for my students. Obviously, that cannot be always true, right? And this is kind of what Emma's saying. Sometimes you just gotta, I don't want to accept less, I want to have high expectations, but at the same time, especially a gen ed course, they may have other priorities, right? And if they are prioritizing their courses, that may be the smartest thing for them to do. And then my course, maybe it's always at the bottom, or maybe it's this week it's at the bottom. And so when you see people not doing what you think they should be doing, sometimes there are reasons that we don't know about. And I just want to keep that in the back of my mind that, you know, even though I think that my course should be the most important thing in their life at all times, but it really is not.
I think along with that, the other resource that has to be mentioned, because there are a lot of issues in terms of time management and other sorts of stuff, getting back to some of the issues that Chris had mentioned earlier. Student Success Center, they have loads of good resources available for students, and any sort of working with them and incorporating it into the classroom will help out quite a bit. So.
Also some real world dynamics in groups, right, that I think are valuable to emphasize. Sometimes you get in teamwork and in group work in the real world in your career, working together with colleagues. Some don't pick up the slack and someone has to, and acknowledging that and talking about, you know, how communication can be helpful in these group dynamics and how that's going to happen in the real world. I think that helps too. It's a part of the learning process in some ways.
Thank you all. Are there any further questions?
I've got one more question, and it seems important. So getting to specificity and in-text citations. So my experience with ChatGPT, I use it to write content for my classes, just placeholder content, because I'm teaching people how to format Word and spreadsheets. So I'm not as worried about the content myself. But what I've noticed when creating content is that ChatGPT tends to produce commonly available information over the internet without specific text sources. So when we're talking about in-text citations, have you all experienced automated writing that does include specific sources and in-text citations? And if not, is that a way we can integrate further to promote academic integrity?
I mean, if they're using ChatGPT, at least 3, and I haven't dabbled in the new one yet, although I'm pretty sure it's at this point it's the same. It'll give you really impressive looking citations. I gave an example in one of the presentations we did about we actually have a live chat service through the library, and we had a nursing student who was asking a question. It was a very specific nursing related research question. And I went through our chat transcripts and I was like, you know, I'm just going to see. So I copied her question that came in through chat and put it into ChatGPT. And part of it asked for an article. It didn't just say cite a source, whatever it was, asked for a specific article and blah, blah, blah. It gave me an article that dealt with the topic from a volume and even an issue of a legitimate nursing journal. The authors were all fake. The volume and issue had taught, it was, I wish I could remember, it's something about heart disease or something, whatever it was. Let's just say it was heart disease. And in this volume and issue of the Journal of Nursing or whatever it was, there actually were articles in that volume and issue about that topic. This article that it cited was not there. The volume and issue number and the journal were legitimate, and the authors were completely fake. There was no systemic review or whatever it cited. It didn't exist, but it looked really good. And you know, we had an instance where a faculty member approached us because he got a paper from a student that he suspected was written not by the student. And it turns out he was right. It was not. And his focus was wanting to work with the student and not just, you know, okay, F for you because you copied, because the assignment was very not difficult, not a hard assignment. It just was not. There was no reason to go to an outside source. But I will tell you, even Bing, from what I was reading, if students are using Bing, that does give a more accurate citation, are still, as far as I understand, are still not citing journal articles. So anything, and you know, not that we want people flooding us with, hey, I've got this thing, can you check these sources? But I'm just telling you, it will, usually the sources are actually just glaringly bad. It'll cite information and it might give you a museum website or something like that. But so far, I have never found an accurate journal citation. And even the citations that are just, you know, blah, blah, blah.org, even those at this after the slash, forget it. It might even give you the CincinnatiMuseum.org or whatever, and that's actually a thing. But anything after the slash has nothing to do with what it says it's giving you. So just for now, and that, you know, Matt, we joke about this, like tomorrow it could be different, and it literally could be tomorrow. But as of now, they're just not, they can look really good, but they are not accurate at all.
Hey, Cindy, I'm glad you said it. Because, I sound really yucky. I'll type it in.
We'll take one question from Shirley and then we'll wrap up because I want to be respectful of everyone's time today too.
Julie also mentioned that the Knoll Studio is a huge resource for students, and it's accessible to them as well as the tenants.
Yeah, I think really helping students know they're not alone. They have supports in place. We should never forget to remind them about all the resources on campus, whether it's the Knoll Studio, the library, the Student Success Center, even their own professors. Yes, they're there too. You know, like you have people here who want to see you succeed, and all you have, yeah, it does take a lot to ask, but taking that first step to ask could mean the difference between passing and failing, you know, graduating or not.
This is a first gen issue, right? I mean, you know,
Yes.
what most of our students are coming to us with is a history of being policed by their teachers and not being facilitated. And so, you know, to overcome that is hard, especially for first gen.
Yeah.
Sure.
Shirley says, yes, I'm a nerd. I often check those references and have done the exact teaching of I could not find this. Let's chat about it.
But yeah, I think like Cindy said, I mean, this is a problem we have today with hallucinated citations, but soon.
There also could soon be a checker that can help you check that immediately, you know.
Yeah, that's an arms race. I mean, you know,
Very much so.
but you know, so like you said, you use ChatGPT, I use ChatGPT, we use it, and so I can't wait for it to have access to actual journal articles behind the paywall, and so I can ask it, tell me some citations for this, and it's I mean, it's going to be, you know, EBSCO post on steroids. It's going to be great. We're all going to use it, much more efficient, and eventually we're going to be telling our students to use it like we tell our students to use databases right now. It's just going to be even better.
I think that idea of then what does that mean about academic integrity with these tools is going to be a conversation we will definitely be continuing. Maybe we can revisit this in the fall when ChatGPT can do everything. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you've gleaned something from this panel. I know I certainly have, and it's been a really good discussion. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Good day.
After about an hour, you'll also receive an evaluation if you wouldn't mind. It's just like 3 questions, like letting us know if you like this session, if there was anything change about it, suggestions. If you wouldn't mind giving us that feedback, that would be great.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all too. Sorry.
Thank you for getting.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yes, thank you so much.
Very good.